for me not to come onto your show. So,
well, and those were the first words heard by on this stream from one of my guests here today, or actually my co-host today, Faye, the Most Gracious. I am the amateur conversationalist, and this is the premiere episode of the Apostate Alliance. And on the Apostate Alliance, you can feel free to not believe. We are starting this podcast to talk about issues being dealt with by Muslim apostates, and to endeavor to bring Muslim apostates into the atheist and broader skeptic community. Because they are part of the community already, but it seems like we don't see them as much in the atheist and skeptic community as far as on YouTube and different things of that nature. So as I said, I'm joined today by Faye, the Most Gracious. She's agreed to be a co-host here, and she is agreed that when she's available, she might come on maybe once a month and help me co-host this. On other times, I will try to have another ex-Muslim be on here as a co-host. Perhaps we can rope Ali into doing that sometime in the future. And that is our guest today. The first guest for the Apostate Alliance is Ali Malik. He is an ex-Muslim atheist and a human rights activist. And just to talk about this podcast for a minute, this is the premiere episode. You probably won't see another episode until after the first of the year. We'll get through the holidays, and then this will be at least twice a month. And we want to reach out to all ex-Muslims. We want them to come on and tell their stories. We'll have an ex-Muslim on each podcast to come on and tell about their story coming out of Islam, and any issues that they're dealing with as far as, like in the case of Faye here and Ali, I've seen on social media where they get a lot of heat from Muslims, simply because they don't believe. And as Ali's going to talk about here in a little bit, there are many people that are ex-Muslims that are dealing with a lot of bigotry, a lot of ostracization, in fear for their lives, simply because they don't believe. And this is what we want to talk about on these podcasts, and again, get those ex-Muslims into the atheist skeptic community so that their voices can be heard. Now, the first thing we're going to talk about is some issues on Twitter today. Both Faye and Ali, at this time, have been banned from Twitter. Their accounts have been closed out, or they don't have access to them. I don't know if they've been deleted forever, but at this moment, they're not able to use their Twitter accounts. And I'm going to let Faye start and tell you exactly what it was that caused her account to be denied access.
I think one of my followers said it best. I think his name is G Ray. He said he made a list of things that happen every month, and at the top of the list was that Faye gets banned on Twitter every month. There's been a lot of stupid bannings for me, and every time I've appealed, Twitter's always been either really reluctant to respond or they just deny my appeal. So in the case of this instance, it was a case of saying that Allah is a cunt. And I stand by that. I think that's an accurate description of what he is. And I don't know, I feel as though Twitter protects deities who can't be proven, but when it comes to calling different people cunts, for real, on a daily basis, on that account, I used to get death threats, I used to get rape threats, I used to get called all kinds of names. I used to get called out by big figures as well, with massive followings. And very little would be done about that most of the time if I did report it. And the only time I would report it is in the case of a death threat, because I don't really think it's worth reporting for other things. But even in the case of reporting because of death threats, I would just say that Twitter would pick it up and say that there's nothing wrong with the tweets most of the time. So I don't know. I don't know how they're choosing to govern it. But Ali's case is like completely different. You just summarized the thread, and they like. I don't think they didn't erase your account. Did they? They locked it.
Yeah, they logged me out of it. I can't log into my account. But the account is still very much on Twitter, and people can access and see my profile.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you appeal it?
Sorry?
Did you appeal it?
I did appeal it. Like, if I hadn't appealed it, my account would have been restored in 24 hours. But because I wanted to appeal because it's not my fault, there is nothing, it is not even my words. What the tweet was, I was just summarizing a thread in which a Muslim guy goes on it's about like 15 tweets long thread, where in every thread, in first 5 threads, so I'll be using logical argument, I'm using scientific argument and everything, and then next 10 tweets goes on to say atheists are animals, atheists are criminals, they are the cause of all the evil in the world. So all
like Indian family dinner.
Yeah. So all I did was I just used his words and just summarized it in one tweet with a couple of emojis with face palm and just laughing. And I got locked out because of that. And the funny thing in that is the guy who actually said all that stuff, and the thread itself is still on Twitter. The guy is using his account normally. The so-called hateful, well, not so-called, it is hateful because he calls atheists animals. The actual hateful person is on Twitter, and the wild thread filled with hatred towards atheists.
I really wonder who reported you, because it was clearly like, so the person who reported you was clearly malicious, because all you were doing was summarizing it.
Yes.
Like I don't, it's just so strange. Like I can kind of understand why my tweet would get reported, because people's very sensitive about Allah and his feelings. But your tweet, I understand it less. Like I feel like the guy who wrote the original thread reported your tweet.
Yeah. Well, and the funny thing is if you look at the reality of the situation, okay, so Ali here quotes this person saying all this hateful stuff, but his account and that thread is still up, while Ali has been denied access to his account. So one could read from that, and I don't think this is the case, but you could read from this that, okay, this guy saying all this hateful stuff about atheists is fine, but now the person who calls out the person who says hateful things, they're the ones that are in violation of Twitter's terms of service. It just seems ridiculous to me on its face.
It feels like if I see a hate crime happening and I went to the police saying, oh, there's a hate crime happening just out there, and police arrests me for reporting it.
Yeah.
It's so absurd. But so it's hard to even to pin down who reported that tweet. Maybe somebody just thought I was a Muslim because I look like a Muslim and my name's Ali Malik, and I was actually being hateful towards atheists, and some atheist guy who reported it. Or secondly, it's just some trolls who are always on my thread for no reason. They just keep on reporting me anyways. So it can be of either, because there is no communication with Twitter. Twitter don't let us know who's actually reporting this. Or there is, with my appeal, Twitter hasn't got back to me yet, and it's been more than 48 hours.
You bring up an interesting point that I wanted to ask Faye about. I was going to DM her and ask her this, and I forgot all about it. So when Faye's account, when she was denied access to her account, she put a tweet out on a backup account and showed not only that she had been smacked, by Twitter, but Faye, you had a screenshot of the person or the organization that actually reported you and got you banned. How did you get that? That's did they tweet that at you, kind of like
they
taunting you about it?
They tagged me in it.
Okay, who was that?
They tagged me in it. It was some Indian it looks like one of these Indian lefty accounts. I don't know. A lot of people are saying that
something or SACCA.
Yeah. If I can find it, I'll try and see if I can find it.
Well, and when I saw that, there was no doubt in my mind. I'm like, wait a minute. The only way Faye could have this is if they tweeted it at her, basically shoving it in her face, like, "Ha ha, here, I got you banned." You know, that's which is just, you know, that even speaks more about their motivations, because you know, through my interaction with Faye and other ex-Muslims, it's obvious there's an entire contingent of people on Twitter, Muslims, that are just going and trying to find people like you and Faye, Ali, and report their tweets and, you know, and comment hatefully on your tweets. It almost seems like an organized effort on their part. Now,
can I have a wrench so that I can put it in the chat?
Yeah, hold on 1 second. I'm gonna have to do that.
John, from what you were saying, just to take it further a bit, just to make a distinction, because there is one distinction to make. So people like me or ex-Muslim men, we do face backlash, but most of the backlash we face is just other Muslim men challenging us or trying to get us into talking to them, because men to men, they're all up for talking. Even though there is still a boundary that ex-Muslims can't go over. But when it comes to women, ex-Muslim women, their behavior is completely different. They just want to silence most of ex-Muslim women, because when women speak out, these people can't handle it. And other than Faye, Sadia Hamid, who's my co-host on my channel, Park Atheist, and she's the spokesperson for Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain, she gets banned regularly, and she's been banned on Twitter for about 2 months now.
She's been banned since August, right?
August, and her ban originally was for 2 weeks, and she's appealed it 3 times.
Yeah.
But every time she does, she gets banned straight after again anyways. So it happens a lot more to women than it does to men.
Because I remember the last time Twitter put me on, I think it was like a week lock or something. You were telling me that Sadia has been banned for a while. Do you know why she got banned? I've forgotten. So
this time it had nothing to do with Islam. She tweeted out against the transgender stuff, especially what was happening in Canada. And that's another dynamics that, like, if you're a woman and you talk about women's rights, and there is a community within trans rights that attack you. So Sadia had that front to fight as well. That's where she got blocked, because she's not gender critical per se, but she does want to make a distinction between transgenders and biological women. But you'll have to get her on to get her opinion on that.
Yeah.
Hey, so you have mods now, Faye, if you wanted to post that in there. And I just want to take a minute and welcome folks. Math Pig, thank you for stopping by. There's our community shiller, Tony Designs. Thank you for stopping by today. This one guy is here. Maynard Saves is here. My buddy, my brother from another mother. Maynard Saves. Smoke weed every day, Maynard. And that's one of Maynard's catchphrases there. Harry Evett, welcome. And the Holy Spackle is here. Hello, Holly. How are you doing today? Thank you, all of you, so much for being here. There's a tough name to say, Titan Uranus, and that's Uranus like the planet. Okay, I just want everybody to know that's like Uranus like the planet. Now, one thing I've noticed too on Twitter in the last few months is there's been a couple people whom I won't name because of why they left Twitter, but I've seen more than one ex-Muslim. And there's Dragnot Silvis in the house now, I just noticed. But I've noticed a couple of ex-Muslims that have left Twitter. Oh, there we lost Faye.
Okay.
come on back in, Faye. That have left Twitter, like this one young lady that tweeted out here about a week ago saying that she had to leave her Twitter account and all social media because of the hatefulness that she was receiving from the Muslim community. And she didn't really say it specifically, but she alluded to the fact that for her safety, she had to leave social media. And so I presume that she's living in a country that is, Muslim controlled, and that she was in fear for her life, basically, being out on social media and having people maybe find out who she is. So let's go from there into, and I'm gonna let Ali start, but I think all of us, have some news items we want to bring up. I have a few here that I bookmarked about things that ex-Muslims are going through in Muslim countries. But go ahead, Ali, and I'm going to step away for 1 minute while you tell the things you have to say today.
Yeah, thank you, John. Let's start with the West itself, because I think we should criticize ourselves before we before we go into what's happening in Muslim countries. So what we see happening in the West is selective outrage, and that's quite disheartening, because when I moved to the West, when I moved to Britain, I thought, after all of my struggles of leaving Islam and everything, I thought every life matters the same. But when you hear stories about prosecution, ex-Muslims being prosecuted or blasphemers being prosecuted in Muslim countries, the cases that are highlighted in the West are very selective. And that approach, for example, in the case of Pakistan, when you think of blasphemic prosecutions in Pakistan, almost everybody in the West would think of Asia Bibi, the first case, because that was because most human rights organizations in the West and most of the Western atheistic and secular community were adamant on highlighting that one case. Whereas there are 40 people on death row in Pakistan alone right now for the crime of blasphemy. So, and why the case of Asia Bibi was highlighted more in the West is also interesting, because one, she was Christian. So many of the Christian organizations in the West were pumping in money or just trying to highlight the Christian prosecution in Pakistan. It was easy because she was falsely accused of blasphemy. So she had never committed blasphemy. So it was easier for the West to say, oh, this woman, this Christian woman is being falsely prosecuted in Pakistan. But whereas when it comes to the real blasphemers, the people who have actually committed blasphemy, we don't see any outrage happening from within our community. And I think our community needs to get back, get into the ring and start highlighting the cases who are just being prosecuted for being free thinkers. Doesn't matter if they're not atheists. They are ex-Muslims. They are free thinkers. They're trying to bring secularism into a Sharia-based legal system of Pakistan. So I've highlighted two cases. I've highlighted these two cases because these are two people who might actually have committed blasphemy under pseudonyms online. So they didn't do it under their own name. So one is Professor Junaid Hafiz. I'm sure you might have heard him in the news, or recently some ex-Muslims are trying to highlight his case even more. So this guy is a scholar. He studied in Mississippi in a really famous college. And then he moved back to Pakistan in 2013, and he was a professor there in a couple of universities. So apparently, we're not sure if it's the same person, but apparently under a pseudonym in a closed Facebook group, he called Muhammad Munafiq Mullah. So Munafiq Mullah means hypocrite. Hypocrite Mullah, yeah. That was his crime. Then the people from the university started marching on the streets asking for his arrest. He was arrested in 2014. put on a trial for blasphemy. The death sentence for Pakistan in blasphemy is death. The sentence is death. So when he was arrested at the end of 2013, and a lawyer. First, he found it really hard to get a lawyer for himself because nobody was willing to defend him because he was accused of blasphemy, and it's actually a death wish for lawyers to defend somebody who's accused of blasphemy in Pakistan. So one lawyer did eventually in 2014 decided to take up the case. He started getting death threats, and he said, "I'll defend him no matter what threats I get." And then within next 2 months or so, some people just walked into this lawyer's office and shot him, just killed him. Once that lawyer was killed because he was defending a blasphemer, he didn't find any lawyer after that to defend him. In 2017, he eventually did get a lawyer to defend him, but the case isn't even going to trial anymore. He's been in jail for 6 years, more than 5 years now, and nobody even cares in the West. We don't see the outrage for him in the West. We don't see our community, our atheist and secular and free thinkers community actually talking about Junaid Hafiz, because all he did was he made a comment on Facebook.
And so
it's the same for Sahel. It's the same for Sahel Arabi as well. He's been in prison for 7 years now.
Arabi, yes.
Mm.
In Iran.
And you have Raif Badawi. We have 12 feminists in Saudi prisons, Muslim feminists.
When this happens in Muslim countries, is it just the pretense of them being allowed to put up a defense? I mean, do these people they're being charged, violation of blasphemy laws, do they actually get to put on a defense?
Well, there are multiple fronts to it. So all in it, once you are accused of blasphemy, there aren't many. The chances of your survival are quite slim, anyways. So even if by some miracle, because there aren't many people who actually, if the case goes to trial to the court, there aren't many people who actually get out or freed. 40 people are on death row in Pakistan right now, but let's say the case, so 65 people have just been killed in Pakistan since the blasphemy law was Islamicized. So a big history about the blasphemy law of Pakistan. So Pakistan gained its independence in 47. From 47 to 1986, the blasphemy law existed, but it wasn't Islamicized. It just stated, so any statement that hurts religious sentiment in general was covered in blasphemy laws. But what they did in 1986 was they added the words of Allah, Muhammad, and Quran into those penal codes. So now, if I give you a bit of comparison, in 40 years from 47 to 86, and then 33 years from 86 to now, from 47 to 86, there was one prosecution of blasphemy in Pakistan, and the person was freed. So he wasn't actually sentenced or anything, and there was no lynching or assassination. But from 86 to now, 2019, 40 people are on death row and 60 people further have been killed, just because the word of Muhammad and Quran were added into that, because it links into emotion, and then people actually use it to ignite hatred and spark into violent communities. And then so we've seen solicitors getting killed. We've seen politicians who actually tried to. So I'm sure Salman Taseer, you might have heard of his name. He was the governor of the province of Punjab when Asia Bibi was being prosecuted. She was arrested and she was being prosecuted in 2009. He just came out and said, he didn't ask for the blasphemy laws to be abolished. He said, let's change the sentence from death to life in prison. that was his crime, and his own security guard killed him. His own security personnel killed him just because he wanted the punishment for blasphemy reduced to life in prison and not death. So there are like sentiment in community, and there are legal. So if you survive one, chances are you're gonna get killed by the other. If you survive the other, chances are you're gonna get by this.
So
it's a real catch-22.
Well, right. So in the case where maybe somebody does escape prosecution, then a citizen will take it upon themselves to kill you. So yeah, that's the Holy Spackle brings up something interesting. She's been mentioning in chat how, and I think you alluded to it yourself, Ali, is that it's not just people who leave Islam, to become atheists. It's people who leave Islam to follow other faiths. And Holly was pointing out that, and had a question. Do you think that some of the human rights outrages focuses on Christian imprisonments more because they have big organizations and churches backing them? Yeah. So that's why
it's not just converts, though. It's also Muslim minorities. We have minorities in Pakistan like the Ahmadis, like Shias, who are also persecuted. Like Ahmadis can't even identify as Muslims because it would be considered blasphemy. They can't call their places of worship mosques because it would be considered blasphemy.
It would be.
It's
on
not just. Sorry, go on.
So any Pakistani citizen, if you apply for Pakistani passport, on the form to get passport, you have to sign and declare Ahmadis non-Muslims, because it's part of Pakistan's constitution. Pakistan's constitution, which was written in 73, actually classes that you cannot call Ahmadis Muslims. And in blasphemy, if you think of any religious minority being prosecuted, Ahmadis are on the top of that list, because they can just do anything. They can call, as Faye mentioned, if they call their place of worship a mosque, which is supposed to be a Muslim place of worship, that's blasphemy, and they're prosecuted for that. If they call themselves Muslim, that's blasphemy. If they proselytize their religion to some Muslim guy, so just having a debate with some Muslim person can lead them being prosecuted legally in Pakistan, because they're not allowed.
And I think aside from the blasphemy laws, the levels of discrimination for minorities, like the Christian minorities, like the Hindu minorities, like the Ahmadi minorities, is extremely severe as well. And these are all stemming from the fact that these blasphemy laws exist.
Yes.
So somebody in the chat is kind of taking you to task, Ali. He calls you a name. I'm not going to say it. And he says that the laws are not being applied, but that here in America, there's also blasphemy laws on the books, and they're not being applied. Now, as far as in Muslim countries, I think you mentioned Pakistan, there's over 60 people that are imprisoned right now.
40 people on death row. 1,576 people have been tried in Pakistan for blasphemy. 40 people are on death row. 65 people have been killed. So anybody who's saying these laws aren't implied, they are wrong, because we see the numbers. We see people being prosecuted. We see people are on death row right now. We see people getting killed. We see students, like university students, not even villagers. We're not talking about people who aren't well educated. University students killing one of their friends because he might have committed suicide. Sorry, might have committed blasphemy, not suicide.
Blasphemy. I thought maybe you misspoke there. So as far as these news items, and Faye, do you have anything from the news that you wanted to share?
Not really. Ali has a lot more research, because all this stuff, we were talking about it just before Blasphemy Day, which was up in, when was that? It was like beginning of September, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, so we were talking about all these things just before Blasphemy Day, where I had chosen to draw Muhammad. And like, I remember you telling me all these things, and I don't know much about this because I don't delve into this world. I'm just trying to figure out my life. That's my whole deal. But when you were telling me these things, I could not process it because it's such a world apart from the freedoms that we have here. And while a lot of people might say, oh, we have blasphemy laws in the West, it's not the same. It's not the same. Like, Britain had blasphemy laws as well up until, I don't even know, like 20, 30 years ago.
2008, actually.
Huh?
Up until 11
Yeah,
years
2008. That's, you told me that. We had blasphemy laws here, but nobody was being killed for them. People weren't being, lynched in the street for them. In Bangladesh, you have students killing their teachers, teachers killing students because of not necessarily blasphemy laws, but because of insults to religious figures or religious mythologues or whatever.
So,
and the situation is just not. Sorry, go on.
So we'll continue off. You can come back to that. So Bangladesh is supposedly a secular country. Their constitution is secular. Yes, exactly. That's the right. In Bangladesh, it is like.
Well, it's important.
Bangladesh is a secular country.
But it's important to point out too that Faye is laughing so hardly there because she used to live there.
That's where
I was born there, and I'm from a very religious village. But I mean, we can have the Pakistan-Bangladesh debate another time. But it's barely a country at the moment. The political situation has just been a mess. Like from the time I had memories, the political situation has been neither here nor there. And while it might identify as a secular country, I think it serves well to remember that Bangladesh and Pakistan, well, mainly Pakistan, separated from India because Muslims wanted their own country. And then Pakistan called us midgets, and that's why we wanted to break from them. But we'll leave that for now.
And the prosecution of atheists and the critics of Islam in Bangladesh, it's coming from communities. They just get attacked from mobs, and we have killings, a lot of killings happening in Bangladesh as well. And to an extent,
we have extremist conservative groups like the Jamaat-e-Islami. We have Deobandis, and we have some Barelvis, but they aren't as violent as the other ones.
The tide is turning, though. The tide is turning.
Hey, real quick from the live chat, from the same person that was calling us out earlier, Hashrima Senju says, "But dude, Mr. John." Okay, Mr. John. I hope you understand ex-Muslims are not an authority on the topic, any topic of Islam. Now, I'll let you guys respond to that, but I would just like to say, do you not understand the concept of being ex-Muslim? That means that they were at one time Muslim, so I think that they do have an understanding about issues surrounding Islam. But do you have any response to that, Ali or Faye?
I mean, I have a personal interest in Islam. I've always had a personal interest in Islam, but right now we're not really talking about Islam. We're talking about blasphemy laws. It's an irrelevant point to say that we cherry pick verses when there are no verses being mentioned here.
Exactly. Yeah, and as far as ex-Muslims not knowing Islam goes, that's just crazy idea, because Islam is not an easy religion to leave. I believe we are coming to that in the second of our podcast. And if you stay on the chat, you know our struggle and how Muslims we were and when we eventually left Islam.
Ali, this gentleman came from my Twitter page. He's very aware of who we both are. he's just here to talk shit.
Well, and so I'm not understanding his story though. Too, he just posts. Ashrima posts. I was one time, I believe it was one. He said once time an ex-Muslim because I was an ignorant. So apparently, now you say you were once an ex-Muslim and now you're Muslim, so you must have been Muslim to begin with, then became an ex-Muslim, then went back to the faith. I'm not really following the chronology there.
I'm confused as to why you're here. Just go and pray some. Like, isn't it Maghrib time now? Like, what are you doing?
Right. Some of the news items that I wanted to share, and I'm not going to like delve into them. I'm just going to kind of read the headlines. Here's a recent story about a 17-year-old young man who had his throat slashed by his father simply because he was gay. Yep. And then there was 4 men were caned. And I got to see, caned in Malaysia as part of a crackdown on homosexuality. So it's not just, non-believers. There's a whole host of reasons why people can be persecuted in these Muslim countries. There was, this one, the page is gone. There's also a story here that I found interesting to where, and I believe this is people that are in westernized countries, where what they do is they send children on a holiday, I think it is, female children.
Yep.
They tell them they're going on a holiday, and what they're really doing is they're going to a country where female genital mutilation can be performed.
Yes. So in Britain, the border control and the customs, they started raising awareness around this. It's not just FGM; it's about forced marriages as well. And so what we see happening is Muslim parents would take their kids back to the countries they're originally from, and then at times they would just take their passports away and eventually enslave them in. Or just kidnap them in those countries. We've seen that. I personally know more than 2 women that's happened to them. So what if you are in Britain and you fear your parents are taking you to a country where they might harm you or they might keep you and force you into a marriage? What you're supposed to do? You're supposed to put a spoon in your trousers. And when you go through a metal detector gate, they'll see a spoon in your trousers. They'll take you away from your parents and just talk to you on the side within the airport or train station where you're going. So this was such a big issue because parents do have power over children, and children can't really tell the airport control and the border control what's really happening. So, I think
if I could add to that, so with Islamic communities and because of Islamic rulings that exist, I don't want to drive the conversation towards Islam, but within communities, a lot of minorities are discriminated against. You have minorities such as women, minorities such as the LGBTQ plus community, all kinds of minorities, smaller sects of Islam, they're all persecuted in their own way. They're all oppressed in their own way. As someone who's been an educator for over 3 years, I've worked with teenage girls and I've worked with very, very young children. And we've had cases before where parents will want to take their children on holiday, usually around summer. And we've had to file safeguarding cases about genital mutilation. And in terms of, I've had very few instances, because a lot of the time girls don't like talking about it, but I've had to deal with 2 cases where the girls were scared that their parents would want to marry them off in another country. I think it was either this year or the last year where the first prosecution was done for a mother who had put her child through FGM here in the UK. I think it was either last year or this year. But before that, things like this weren't prosecuted at all. She was the first one to be arrested for it. And unfortunately, because so many people still see it as a cultural thing to put their own daughters through this abuse, it goes highly underreported, highly underregulated. but more and more training is being done to make educators and carers, really, social carers, so educators, teachers, youth group leaders, things like that, police officers, nurses, more aware of these issues and how to handle them. It's really, really unfortunate that people still see these things as it's their culture and they're allowed to do that. It's honestly, it's sick. It's really, really sick what some parents will put their own flesh and blood through. We've also had cases of people who were gay or lesbian being sent back home to be put through conversion therapy or to be put through an exorcism. And these are young kids. These are all under 18. They're children. And it's really, really terrifying.
Hey, real quick, my apologies to those of you watching in the audience. I'm going to cover Faye up real quick because I want to share this post from the live chat. Ex-Muslim Somali Voices says, ex-Muslim Somali Voices is now focusing on Somali parents in the West, taking their kids back to Somalia and Kenya for all sorts of, female genital mutilation, gay conversion, forced marriage, Islamic training, etc. And as a matter of fact, that was one of the news articles that I had bookmarked here. It just came out December 2nd, and I'll try and link this in the video description after this post as a video. But it was a story of a young man in Somali, saying that they call for my slaughter. Apparently, there's over 1 million atheist Somalis that interact on social media, and they try and do it anonymously, but then there's this whole contingent of people that go on those sites and try and dox these people so that they can suffer the consequences of being an atheist. And let me get face uncovered here because
yeah, we don't need any more of that. But in terms of Islamic training, what's really unfortunate is that we don't actually have to send our kids abroad for that. Most of the radicalization process that I went through was solely done here in the UK. I joined the Wahhabi movement while still living in a westernized country because we have so many underregulated community centers and mosques. Where all these publications are widely distributed and taught to children. And these publications would include Sharia teachings that are vile and backward, teachings about homosexuals that are calling them degenerates and, inhuman and things like that. Misogynistic teachings, all kinds of things. Anti-Semitism is a big one as well. And unfortunately, you don't even have to send your children to another country for that. That's widely available in the West because it's so underregulated. And I would also like to say, because we briefly spoke about Twitter at the beginning of this stream, that Twitter is one of the biggest recruiting grounds for ISIS. ISIS has a massive grasp and reach through the internet, but Twitter is a massive catalyst for their recruitment. And I find it extremely ironic that they will police what people say about religion, but won't police, at least effectively, recruiters for actual violence in the world.
Huh. That is something. Go ahead.
If people would like to know a bit more about how Wahhabism actually gained prominence in the West, especially in Britain and Europe, look for a person called Hassan Ridwan, who was actually a teacher in an Islamic school, and he saw it happening with his own eyes. He's been through the journey where he saw this happening around him, and he's written about it. He's got videos about it on YouTube. Look for Hassan.
He has a channel.
Yes, and
I'll see if I can dig it up.
Ex-Muslims of Somali Voice is doing some amazing work as well. You should look for Halima, who we all admire.
That's our mutual Dutch friend, Halima.
Yeah, and she's a brilliant writer. Her poetry is really hard-hitting as well. You should look her up as well. Follow her.
Yes, I believe we follow one another on Twitter.
Yeah, she's brilliant.
Yeah.
So, we're also here today because we want to hear, because each week we're going to have somebody on to discuss this, but we want to hear a little bit about Ali's journey out of Islam, and, his time as a Muslim and what brought him out of Islam and what he's been dealing with since then. And for this part of the broadcast, I'm going to turn it over to Faye to wheedle that information out of Ali. So, Faye, you go right ahead.
This is if you knew me and Ali, you'd know that we play this game where we just measure how oppressed each of us is. It's the best game, and he always wins because he's a refugee. And sometimes I win because I'm a woman. But Ali, why don't you tell us, give us a background of how you grew up, what you grew up on, and talk us through that first, and then we'll move on from there.
I grew up in Pakistan, and being in Pakistan and seeing the environment and growing up in the environment and judging it from it, I didn't think it was possibility. Islam was the only possibility to have respect in life. Like, Islam was the only way forward. Plus, my family had been through some struggles themselves, which made them more fundamentalist kind of Muslim. My grandparents saw all of their family converted from Wahhabis to Ahmadiyya Islam. Then they disowned all of their family, moved about 20 hours drive away from them to a completely different city, and just became a lot more fundamental in their approach to Islam. And
just for our majority not Muslim aware audience, do you want to explain what's so bad about becoming an Ahmadi?
So Ahmadiyya Islam is essentially the easiest way to describe that is that reformist movement with a prophet coming in the late 20th century and late 19th century. So this guy comes along, Ghulam Ahmad, born in India in the city of Qadian. He says, I'm here to tell you the real message of Muhammad and Allah, because Muslim Ummah has essentially forgot the real message. But because he claimed to be the prophet, so to say, Muslims wholeheartedly disowned him. But because he was charismatic and he gained following, and then his lineage now, it's in the 4th generation. His lineage now are the heads of the movement, where they constantly trying to. So the one, because he was a philosopher himself, he's asked for most of Islamic teachings to be used as metaphors and not literals, not. And that doesn't sit well with most Muslims, because all 5 schools of thought agree that Helen, Heaven, and Dajjal and everything are actually literal things. Whereas in Ahmadiyya, they believe they are metaphors, and the world we are living in is actually kind of the indication of Dajjal. And I'm saying Dajjal because it's the issue in right now for some reason. In Pakistan there was already a lot of hatred towards Ahmadis. And then Wahhabis converted to Ahmadis, and then my grandparents thought, we need to move away because they might influence us into becoming Ahmadis. They moved away and started instilling like very literal and fundamentalist values of Islam into their children. That was my mom's side of the family, and I grew up in the mom's side of the family, learning about my family was so Wahhabi, they used to think the Saudi Wahhabism isn't strict enough.
You were LAD, that's why. LAD.
These Saudis are Mukallas, they follow an Imam.
Yeah, because they're Hanbalis.
Yeah. So I actually grew up in the hub. My mom was like manazar. So he used to debate Islam with different sects of Islam, and we were really strict, and so much so that we believe that praying behind an imam who's not from Salafi Wahhabi sect as we were isn't right, because it's not going to be accepted, because the guy you're praying behind is faith.
Because they're not Muslim.
Yes.
Yeah.
So growing up, I learned all of my basic Islamic education and how to pray and practices and everything from my grandmother. He was Salafi. My father used to be in Saudi. So after my father moved back to Pakistan, he called us all to his side of the family. So just come on, we all should live here. You don't have to live with your grandmother anymore. After moving into this side, I was once praying in the mosque on my father's side of the family, and one of my uncles, who was also the trustee of the mosque, came up to me and goes, "Why are you praying like this?" And I said, "Oh, that's how we pray." No, that's wrong. You couldn't do that.
Arguments in the mosques about how to pray.
Yes, exactly. In very early on in my Islamic journey, I had realized that every Muslim practiced differently, and
a little different. Yeah.
A little different. In our case, it was a lot different. Like
but I think even amongst Salafis, there's like slight differences.
Yes.
Because no one has the same opinion on everything.
Yeah. Yeah. So I had made up my mind on practices by the age I was 14, thinking this: okay, if we know we are praying to Allah and Muhammad is God's messenger, essentially the Shahada, the way we pray it doesn't really matter, because every prayer gets accepted anyways. Sorry. Then came the differences on everything else other than practices. Muhammad's, what kind of body Muhammad was in. So I had some extended relatives who were Brailwis, and they thought he was Nur, a celestial body in human form. And we thought he was made of clay and a human being. There was, I had a massive struggle with this, with the differences within different sects of Islam, because I had a family member or a loved one who was part of different sects of Islam. And then I used to think, if the word of God is really one word, why doesn't everybody believe in the same word? Why is everybody believing in so differently? So I started looking more and more into Islam just to be a better Muslim, just to think that I am the right one. Because that famous hadith that everybody in Pakistan used to quote, that there's going to be 72 fiqhs and only one of them is going to be right. And I wanted to be the right one, because heaven, right?
That's a big Salafi hadith, is that there's going to be 72 sects and only one is going to be saved. And those are the people who are the Salaf as-Salihin, or I can't even remember what that means. There's like on the right path sort of thing.
So I started asking questions about things, and people used to get angry on questions. The question of
did you used to start fights? I used to start arguments.
Yeah, and then when I was 17, we went for Hajj. All of us, my mother, my father, my grandmother, me. We were all in Makkah doing the.
Do you want to briefly explain what Hajj is?
So Hajj is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, the 5th pillar of Islam. And if you can afford it, it's first on every Muslim to do at least once in their lifetime.
Compulsory.
It's like what's janaza? Farz kifaya?
Farz kifaya is fard if you can do it. So compulsory with conditions.
Yes, so it's like if
I believe that's correct.
You should do it. It's first on sahib istatat. If you can afford it, it's first on you.
If you can afford it, and if you're well, and for women, if you have a mahram or a male guardian, then you can go. You
Women
should
can't
do it.
travel on their own. Are you okay?
That's what I said. We're the male guardian.
Of course.
Yeah. Don't bust my balls about it. I made the distinction.
I was in Makkah and
It's the amateur conversationalist. It's not amateur hour.
Oh, I think we're getting a taste of the banter that goes on between Ali and Faye on a regular basis.
I was in Makkah doing Hajj. We went there for 40 days. The Hajj itself takes about 5 days. Then you have rest of the days just to go around and visit sites and just see where Muhammad was born and where they fought all the wars and all the graveyards where all the companions of Muhammad are buried and everything. So I was 17 years old. I didn't want to spend 40 days day and night with my mother and my grandmother. That was literally the last thing I wanted to do, right? So I started hanging out.
And Hajj is like very crowded. It's very cramped. There's like thousands, millions of people there.
Just to tell you how crowded it was, so you're supposed to do Tawaf is Ziyarah, which is in the middle of the Hajj. So just after you pray your Hajj prayer in Nimra, you go to Kaaba to Tawaf is Ziyarah, which is 7 circles around the Kaaba. After about 4 circles, last 3 circles, my feet didn't touch the ground. I was so comfortable. My feet were above the ground. I was levitating in a sea of people, and I was just moving around the Kaaba. There's that many people.
Hey, just real quick, let me interject just a word to the chat. Certainly, anybody that disagrees with anything that's being said, and I'm speaking to you, Hashrima, you're free to make your arguments, but I just put them in timeout. One thing I don't want you to do is don't disrespect my guests, okay? That's like the 3rd time you have posted something pejorative about Ali, and I'm not down with that. So you've been put in a 5-minute timeout. When you come back, if you can be reasonable, we'll allow you to remain. But take the next 5 minutes and to think about how you were interacting in my chat. Go ahead, Ali.
To Hashrima, please stay on. I'm reading what you're saying, and I do want to say some things to you when I finish my journey about leaving Islam.
We appreciate your form of love towards us.
Yes. I started hanging out in the libraries of both of the mosques. I was sitting in the house Muhammad was born in the house Muhammad stayed in Medina is turned into a library now. And I was in the Muhammad's house reading about Muhammad's life because I was obsessed with Muhammad.
Yep.
We
have to be.
Yeah. That's the first time I came across him having sexual slaves, laundries, and having one of his kids, a son from one of his sexual slaves who he never married and kept his properties.
When you told me this for the first time, I was so surprised because it was everything that I had learned from since I was a child, was that he had sex slaves and he had a child bride, and like we learned about all his kids and things like that. And for me anyway, being indoctrinated into that ideology, it was such a normal thing. But when you told me that, like you had never heard that in Pakistan where they teach Islam, it was so shocking to me. But anyway, go on.
So before that point, I was 17 at the time. My Islamic education started right from birth, informally and formally from about 5 years old. I spent 4 to 5 hours every day from the age of 5 to 17 learning about Islam. Every single day. Madrasa, school, home, mosque, all 4 places were teaching me about Islam. And nobody had ever told me that Muhammad kept women as his properties and he was allowed to have sex with them without marriage. They were his sexual slaves. That was first crack in the foundation of zeal. I was a zealot. And the more fundamentalist you are, the slighter the crack needs to be to break the foundation. The first crack came when I said, when I read Muhammad sexual slaves. And then I started asking about this when I came back to Pakistan. I started asking about this in the mosque, and I got banned from our own mosque. My dad got called into mosque.
You got banned from mosque.
My dad got called into mosque, and
you are a proper rebel.
Yeah. No, I was just trying to be a better Muslim. I didn't want to leave Islam at the time because I didn't know it was a possibility.
I know.
You were just asking questions and seeking understanding, and they banned you.
Yeah, and they got angry because I was asking about the personality of Muhammad, and some of the phrases used are still like they are so engraved in my memory that I never forget some of the phrases. Phrases like you can ask about practices but can't question the faith. So if I'm not questioning my faith, what's the point in believing? Because I'm believing, you're telling me to believe. If I can't scrutinize my own faith, I'm a robot. I'm not a human anymore. So anyways, my family started getting a bit of hint that this guy might be a trouble. And then he's asking wrong questions and everything. Once I did my A-levels, my father said, okay, I'm sending you to Britain to study. I said, okay. I didn't want to come, but he said, okay, I'm sending you to Britain to do your studies. I came to Britain in 2010 when I was 19. Saw life outside Islam for the first time. I had movies in there, but we hated the West when we lived in Pakistan because for us they were impure. For us they were like they weren't humans. Everything they stood for were wrong.
We hated the West living in the West, so
right?
We hated the West while living in the West.
Yes.
So it's a very common thing.
Yeah. So after coming here in the West and meeting with people who had never been Muslim in their life, who never read Quran, found them to be more morally sound than most of the people I had met in Pakistan. And so the exposure was really important because the exposure made me realize life outside Islam can be moral and people can be without Islam.
Yeah.
And
I want to ask you a question.
Yes.
When people would talk about kafirs and like mushriks back in Pakistan, so like disbelievers, what did you think that they were?
So first of all, we thought the West had no morality. Everybody slept with everybody. There was no notion of marriage because marriage is a sacred institute, right?
Yeah.
To my shame, I'd admit I had used the word animals for Western people when I was Muslim because the premarital sex and everything. And then, we are told right from our childhood to not be like them. Even now, my mom doesn't know of my apostasy, and she always, every time she ends a call with me, she'd say, "Don't forget who we are."
Yeah.
Forget who we are, and I'm so tempted every time. And so I have told my mom, "Oh, Mom, who are we? Aren't we humans?" And
no, no, of course not. Something like I grew up in the UK, so I've lived here for most of my life. And something my mother used to do whenever we would have non-Muslims at our house is she would wash their dishes separately.
Yes.
In some special way, she would like do a prayer or something over them. There's this very clear line between Muslim and non-Muslim. Like, we're not the same, and that's made very, very clear when you grow up in that way. So that's why I asked you that question, because I don't think I really understood what a disbeliever was. I didn't understand that they were human beings like us until I left.
Because we're told to look down on them. If you don't have Allah and Muhammad in your life, you're not going to heaven.
Yeah.
If you're not going to heaven, there is
you must be a degenerate.
Yes.
You must be a degenerate. Yeah. That's the general feeling.
And I had seen non-Muslims, how non-Muslims are treated in Pakistan. For example, so Christians in Pakistan, although they're in a really small minority.
Mm-hmm.
They usually get the sewage and cleaning jobs. That's the only job. It's reserved for Christians. Muslims don't do that job.
They're
And
basically untouchables, right?
untouchables. These are like government jobs, municipality jobs, and when municipality advertise them in papers, they actually say khakru, which is a sweeper, the street sweeper, done in old school, not with machines as we see in the West. It's a guy coming with broom and just sweeping the streets, or sweeping jobs. And when municipalities advertise the jobs in paper, after the title, in brackets, it says for Christians only.
Yeah.
Yeah. So these jobs are reserved for Christians. And then we had a Christian guy who used to come and sweep our street. And in Pakistan, it gets really hot in summer, 49, 50 degrees. And at times they used to knock on doors and ask for water, drinking water. And what you see, so yeah.
It's just the most basic thing to ask for.
Yes, you see a water glass or a cup, which is outside of the house on top of the electricity meter. The Christian who comes already knows this glass is only for him. Muslims can't drink from that glass because Christians are impure and Muslims are pure, and we're not supposed to share that glass together. You pick up the glass, knock on the door, hand you the glass and say, "Can I get some drinking water?" Once he's done, he's supposed to put the glass back on the meter. So it took that extent, the difference between Muslim and non-Muslims that was told to us, that we saw around us, was stark. We saw.
It's an apartheid. It really is.
It is a religious apartheid, completely. That. And these things, if you see this all your childhood, that you can't share the same drinking glass with Christians, what are you going to think of?
What can you share with them? What can you share with them? You can't even share water with them.
No, you can't share the same pot. So there is a notion of human and non-human in that.
Or just superiority, I think.
Superiority. Muslims have superiority in Islamic jurisprudence and scripture as well. It tells you time and again that you are superior because you believe because you're.
That's why the jizya and the dhimmi status exists.
Yes, it does.
But we're getting away. So you came to the UK and you experienced this kafir lifestyle for the first time.
Not lifestyle per se, because I was still practicing Muslim back then. I didn't get into the lifestyle. I didn't enter my first pub until, well, I did enter to watch some sports, but I didn't. I still didn't like the lifestyle.
Yeah.
I had started to see them as humans. That was the basic thing, but that was such a massive step forward for me, even though it's such a normal thing to do. And then with every passing day, I just started what I've been told all my life. Why was my life filled with hatred? Even if it wasn't hatred, it was still, I was looking down on people just because they weren't Muslims, just because they didn't believe in Allah and Muhammad. Or because they believed in Allah and Muhammad different way from what I did. Massive things. And then because I was studying, I started looking into sciences. And I had studied evolution before in Pakistan, but in Pakistan studying evolution is...
it's like getting a fairy tale told, isn't it?
It is. And then there is a real discouragement from teacher from believing in it. They don't.
Well, I'll tell you that the situation here in Islamic schools isn't any better. It's still, it's pretty terrible. What my science teacher told me was that evolution, the missing links are actually, there's a verse in the Quran that says that Allah turned the Jews into pigs and apes, and that's what the missing links are that people find.
Yeah. It's crazy.
It's really
and
it's really disgusting.
Yeah, and I was also learning the language because I couldn't speak English back then. I'd never spoken English in my life. I was learning language through TV, and British TV is full of atheists. and comedians would make jokes about God, and there was no lightning striking them on the spot. There was no marching in the street calling for the execution. So that
no one was just jumping them from the stage. That was so happened in Pakistan. Like, we're laughing, but if somebody made jokes like that in Pakistan about Allah and Muhammad, they would literally be jumped on the stage.
Yeah, that's too far. There was Sami Shah, who's a Pakistani comedian. He's in exile as well now. He lives in Australia. He's an ex-Muslim as well. He played the role of Juliet while being a man, and he had a beard. He got tagged for that.
Okay. that's gross.
Yeah, he moved to Australia now.
Not him playing Juliet. That's not gross. The fact that he got exiled because he played a female role is disgusting.
He did start joking about religion after that. Yeah, then he had to leave Pakistan. He's written a book called Islamic Republic of Australia. He's quite funny because he's a comedian.
I gotta find that.
Yeah.
Did a female play Romeo?
No, he's male and he played Juliet.
Well, right, but I was asking, was the role of Romeo played by a female?
No.
No, okay.
No, by a man. That was the controversial bit.
So,
but anyways,
yeah,
you saw these comedians, and they were telling all these risque jokes, and they weren't being. There was no divine punishment coming for them.
Yes.
So what happened next?
So one of the best, like my favorite TV shows I used to watch was hosted by Stephen Fry, and I had fallen in love with Stephen Fry because he's extremely intelligent.
Oh, he's the best.
Yeah, and then I just started watching his content off QI as well, off his show, and just watching his videos on Twitter. YouTube. And that's when I came across the real heathens, like the people like
the hardcore heathens.
So I was already questioning the infallibility of Muhammad anyways, because he had done things for himself that he had forbidden others to do. Having more than 4 wives, he had 11 wives, and the sheer how
nobody talks about it. Like, we're the only ones who are talking about it. That man married 11 women at the same time. Many of them were captives. One of them was a fucking child. Okay, we are the only ones talking about that. I feel like if Jesus did the same thing, atheists would rip him a whole new asshole.
Yes.
But because it's Muhammad, no one's fucking talking about it.
And how Quran was, the Quranic verses just came on his convenience. Like, they were brought down on his convenience. He was sitting in a gathering one day, ready to take his wife. And he announced to his companions, companions, I'm taking the 5th wife. Companion goes, oh no, we don't know. How can you take the 5th one? No, surprise, surprise. Gabriel comes down and he goes, hold on a minute. I'm talking to Gabriel right now. He's just told me the rule of 4 doesn't apply to me. It applies to all of you. And I'm okay.
Well, yeah, the power really got to his head.
Yeah.
Really got to his head.
So, and then just consuming atheistic content, and that just made me realize. And I actually looked at it from all different angles. I've looked at it from historical point of view. I've looked at it from psychological and evolutionary point of view. There was 4 questions that I wanted answers to.
Oh, this should be good.
Does God exist?
Mm-hmm.
Why do people believe in him? Why do people want to believe in him? And what purpose it serves? So I did find answers to some of the questions looking at
this
logically.
Mainly, I think it's fear of dying.
Communal bonding. It started out as communal bonding, actually. And it did serve a purpose back then. But now, because we've believed in gods for a long, long time throughout human history.
Have you seen Patton Oswalt's bit about sky cake?
No, I haven't.
You need to see that.
Okay.
You'd love it.
Well, no, and to Faye's point, I think that belief in God across the board, not just in Islam, does have a something to do with fear of mortality. And I've always said that God is not a word. God is an acronym that stands for getting over dying.
Nice.
Or it could also stand for greatly obfuscating death. So I think that. Go ahead, Bay.
I think also in a very egotistical way, I think humans like to view themselves as special. And if there's no God in heaven looking out for them and judging them, then are we really special? We're just specks in the universe that happened by accident.
Yeah,
I mean, to put it really simply. But I think that God removes, like, I think one of the biggest things that I struggle with, and I don't want to, like, detract from you, this is your story time, but, like, I think one of the biggest things that I struggle with since leaving religion is, like, figuring out what it all means and why we're here, and if it really means anything. And I think that believing in something like a God, believing in, you know, that your death will serve some kind of purpose, takes away a lot of that stress. Like, you really don't need to make anything of your life as long as you follow the rules.
Well, and that's funny too, because a lot of like Christian apologists that people in the community interact with always like to try and make a point out of, well, but if you're an atheist, you know, what meaning can you have in your life? You know, I mean, if it's all just a random thing. And Faye brings up a good point, is it would be easier for a believer, you know, not to have meaning in their life, because they can just always think, well, you know what, this life is just a test for the life I'm going to get after I die.
Yeah, because the Quran,
as opposed to where atheists believe this is the only life there is, and you're going to get as much out of it as you can.
Yeah, it like adds a layer of stress, whereas like in the Quran, at least what I was taught was that, you know, Allah continues to say that patience is a virtue, and that any kind of bad thing that happens to you is either a punishment from Him or it's a test. Yeah. But when you don't believe in any of that, and there is no God that's either testing or punishing you, then your life is just fucked. Like, and you have to like rationalize that and get over it. So I think that God is it's a coward's way out, in my opinion.
It's looking for meaning for life, not meaning in life.
Yeah.
But we need meaning in life, and how we get that is we can have our own approach for that. We don't need we don't need to outsource it. Actually, we don't need to be. We live in a society that has actually defined it for us. We live.
It's a very, very lazy way of writing your own life.
It is. It is. Yeah.
So Ali, what you know, we've kind of led up to this. Where was it where you finally broke through and decided, you know what, I don't believe this stuff anymore?
To be honest, I don't really know. So I think somewhere around 2012. I actually had stopped believing in Muhammad and God, both of them. But I didn't admit it to myself because I didn't want to. It was hard. I went into depression because I didn't know where I belonged. Because if I wasn't a Muslim, I wasn't a Pakistani.
Did you also feel as though like your entire world was just, everything was a lie?
So, yes, exactly. Everything in my life was built on one foundation. That was Islam. And now, if I get rid of that foundation, nothing exists for me. I don't know how to go forward with my social life. I don't know how to go forward with my professional life. And my studies were getting affected by it. I was just constantly going down. The more I was thinking about these issues, my friend had started leaving me one by one. All of my friends, I was living with my childhood friends, even though I was in London. They started seeing this change in me, where I was going from fundamentalist to just practicing to a skeptic to questioning, and to actually just whenever we had a discussion to actually actively disagreeing with some of Muhammad's,
Dissenting. Yeah.
and then they started leaving me one by one. We were living in a massive house, 4 of us, 3 of my childhood friends and my younger brother. Started leaving me one by one. Then my younger brother left as well. I was completely alone.
Yeah.
Fell into depression. Isolated myself from outside world because I didn't know how to conduct myself. I didn't know where I belonged. There was a crisis of identity and existence both at the same time. I didn't belong in Pakistani communities because Pakistani community didn't want anything to do with me. My social life outside Pakistani community wasn't strong enough to carry on with it without having an identity. Completely isolated from myself for about 2.5 to 3 years, where I didn't make any new friends, didn't go out, didn't even know the ex-Muslim movement existed actually, because I thought I was cursed. I thought I was being a traitor. I was leaving. So everything we hear Muslims shouting at us right now,
we thought
I already called me myself.
Yeah. Were you angry?
Sorry?
Were you angry?
I'm never angry.
Were you angry like when you left Islam, at yourself, at Islam?
No, it was a state of despair, complete despair, not having any hope whatsoever, which actually did lead me down a harmful path. I did try to commit suicide a couple of times, even though that was completely against my nature. Like I'm not a harming person. I don't self-harm at all. But that was completely because there was no hope left in life.
But you think those things because that, like my life, you were a man, so you could still pursue a career. Like I had none of that.
I didn't know who I was. I didn't have or existence.
But what I'm saying is like when you have that foundation that Islam is only the really thing that matters, and then you discover that that's a lie. Like it's not true. Everything that you've been told, everything that you've been sheltered from, is a lie.
Yes.
You don't know how to conduct your life from that, how to recover from that. You don't know if you're supposed to recover from that, and if there's something wrong with you. And I can relate to that a lot. So even if it wasn't in your nature, like you didn't have a history of suicidal intent, you didn't have a history of depression, you weren't upset before, but because your entire worldview had just shifted into nothing, like pure meaninglessness, pure nihilism, it can drive a person there.
Yeah, it can. And then finally I did came across people who had left Islam, and then I thought, okay, there is a possibility. There are people out there who've been through the same struggle. I saw my first ex-Muslim person on BBC.
Who was the first person?
The person we all know and love, Maryam Namazi, actually.
You saw Maryam first?
Maryam was the first ex-Muslim I saw, and I had personified her because she was, she kind of became my savior actually, because she was the first person I saw, and then I realized, oh, there are people out there. Maybe I should reach out to them and see what they feel. Maybe I'm not the only one out there.
Yeah.
So when Maryam came on the screen, they showed she's the founder of Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain. Googled her. They had an online forum. Started just talking to people online on the forum, and one day just decided. It took me about 4 years to come out and meet some other ex-Muslims face to face. I had left Islam in 2012. In 2016, I met my first ex-Muslim, and
Who did you meet?
I went to a meetup, ex-Muslim meetup organized by Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain, which was advertised on their website, and I just thought, okay, I think it's time, because my life, I was actually tired of being hopeless.
Yeah.
That okay, I need to just.
That's weird, isn't it? Being tired.
Yeah.
Of being hopeless. Yeah.
Came out, met ex-Muslims. Like I went to the venue, I remember standing outside of the venue where my hands are shaking, my palms are full of sweat, feeling shortness of breath, having a panic attack just because it's time to verbalize that I have left Islam to somebody other than me. And I had no idea how would that be received, even though it was a meetup organized by other ex-Muslims.
Yeah. You don't know if this is like a trap.
Yes. Yeah.
It's really terrifying.
Yeah, I was anxious and having a panic
attack. Can you say who the first person you met was, or are they still?
The first person, I still know the person. And everybody I've met through Council of Ex-Muslim, who I volunteer for now and I'm part of, have all been really lovely because we understand each other. And it was so weird to actually meet other people who'd been through the same journey, but it was the first step towards rehabilitation, towards coming into terms with myself. Took me a long time from then. For example, I had to work on my anxiety and fear of people, and my depression took me 2 years. It wasn't until 2018 where I started feeling comfortable in my apostasy. It wasn't active before that.
I think I'm still there, to be honest.
6 years of this struggle, after going through 6 years of this struggle, the last I want for anybody else to go through that.
Yeah. No,
that's why even though I have a real risk of losing my mom, I have a real risk, not just risk, I know my mom is going to disown me. She had already told me that. I still want to speak out because I don't want anybody else to go 6 years of struggle that I've been through.
Yeah, you did it for 6 years. To be fair, I discovered the ex-Muslim community a lot quicker. So I left in 2017, and I went to my first meetup this year. And I think for a long time I avoided looking at it because it was too painful. For me, I don't know what it was. With Islam, I had this huge fascination with it. And it's almost like when you do a degree in literature and then realize that it's useless. So I just went through my whole life. I don't want to offend anybody by saying that. I'm sorry, all you fine arts degree people. But I spent my whole life learning about Islam, and I had like this love for it. And then when I realized it wasn't true, it was almost like it broke my heart. Like I literally could not.
I couldn't. And I'm thinking of your video that you did about your ex, and you were speaking of Allah, how Allah is your. It's almost like losing, realizing that a loved one is not who you thought they were, and
realizing that a loved one just never existed, and also that was never real, and that was never love. And for me, like even delving into the idea of religion was just too painful for about a year. But I think the first meetup I went to was this year in January. It was before the International Atheist Day, where I met you for the first time. That was in March, I think. But the first one I went to was in January, and I remember it so. It was like it was yesterday, and I was like that child that you leave on the first day of like kindergarten or nursery, where you leave them in school and they're just like crying, like they don't want to be there, they want their mother. Like that was me in January. Like I didn't know what to do. I was anxious. I was I cried for hours. We were at pancakes, like people were worried about me. People coming up to me offering me tissues. And it's really, really painful to take that first step because it's still so difficult to leave Islam. Even in a Western country where practically nothing will happen to you, aside from like your family possibly coming out to kill you or disown you or, berate you for whatever you do.
But that's nothing, right?
Compared to the East, it's fucking nothing. And I've seen that point.
We still have to campaign against that.
Of course, of course. Like, I'm not saying that. And I've seen a lot of people, there were a few users on Twitter back when I had my old account, who were complaining to me, like, you Western ex-Muslims, you always compare your struggles to the Middle East. It's nothing compared to the Middle East. And I was like, I don't remember a time where we weren't allowed to complain about our own pain. Like, it's still painful. It's still painful. Like, you haven't come out to most of your family, but all of my family knows that I'm an ex-Muslim, and I struggle with that daily. that is a daily struggle for me. It's both a struggle that makes me angry as well as upset. It's, to be fair, it's the only thing that really makes me upset. But it's still a struggle. And, you know, discovering people who may not necessarily have like the same interests as you, but have been through the same shit, is helpful.
It's extremely helpful, extremely, and it's actually the first step towards you coming
sound mind.
Oh.
Having a sound mind.
It is.
And realizing, because I think also, even though the movement existed and, you know, all these different organizations existed, so with you was the Council of Ex-Muslims, we have another one, Faithless, here in the UK. I'm not advertising for either side. There's loads of different organizations here in the UK for things like that. But I still did not exist. Those things existed. And the only ex-Muslim that I was aware of when I left Islam was Ayaan Hirsi Ali, and she was in the Netherlands. So it wasn't like I could just type up a letter and be like, hey, help me.
So our friend is back under another account. I believe that's Hiroshima, now here as Allah Senju, saying that this nonsense of Muslims want to kill you for leaving religion just won't end. I don't see why that's nonsense. It happens. You can.
My own father tried to kill me. You can exit stage left, bro.
So what this account, first as Hiroshima Senju and now as Allah Senju, is trying to do, I understand when Muslims do try to defend their religion, or they want their religion to be portrayed in the positive. But what they do in order to do that is erase and negate other people's struggle and deny all the atrocities that are being committed in their religion. You can still be a realist and fight for your religion to be shown in the right direction. But for that, you have to bring change yourself. You need to campaign to bring change within your community. Then you see the other pieces of the puzzle falling into that. If you are better yourself, the others are going to show you good. There is no grand conspiracy going on.
I really don't see it as our responsibility to put Islam in the right light. I think that Muslims are, you know, empathetic and human enough to be able to rationalize and progress their religion in the ways that they want to do it. I really don't think, as us being disbelievers and people who have left the faith, that is somehow our responsibility to put Islam in the correct light. Islam, from what we experienced, both of us came from a Wahhabi Salafi it was highly homophobic, highly misogynistic, oppressive, demeaning. It literally made non-Muslims look like animals to us. In our minds and in our understanding of the world, Muslims were the only people who were deserving of a good life. Like, that is how we were brought up. So that is all we can like really talk from. We can't talk from a progressive Muslim standpoint because it's not what we like. Even if you put me in a progressive mosque today, I struggle to understand what's going on. Like, there is a fundamentalist in the back of my brain that's just screaming incessantly the entire time that I am in a progressive setting. She can't stand to be there, and she doesn't know how to behave.
In the live chat, I'll leave it up to the two of you. This isn't necessarily this isn't what
that
this
might be a mistake.
Yeah, Senju is asking if they can join the the hangout here and speak.
Do you want him to join?
Well, we've been on.
How much time do we have?
Well, I don't generally like to go more than a couple hours with a live stream, just because, you know, making them these big, long, unwielding streams, you know, people aren't going to sit down and watch 4 hours, you know, but there's about 25 minutes until we hit the 2 hour mark. I would say that for this, the first podcast, that we won't have somebody come on, but we can definitely do that in the future. You know, send you, not trying to silence you or anything, but I think that would be something we could do in the future if you want to come on and, you know, talk with Ali or with Faye, you know, and actually
also said that Wahhabism is a Zionist invention. I'm not sure that it is, because it's from Saudi. I don't think the Saudis are Zionists. Abdul Wahhab was a Saudi. That's funny. That's the first time that I've heard that.
To this person, just look up the dates of actually the Zion movement and Muhammad bin Wahhab's date of birth.
If you want the starkest idea of how divisive Islam is, non-Muslims can't enter Makkah or Medina. Not for holiday, not to just sightsee. They can't enter it. It's a Muslim exclusive place. And when Muhammad conquered Makkah, he smashed all the idols and he exiled all the people that weren't Muslim from Makkah and from Medina.
Yeah. So when you travel through Miqat is the area of about 415 kilometers. That's from Makkah to Medina, I think. Yeah. So when you travel through the roads, you see the signs on top of the road that says "Lil Muslimin Faqat," only for Muslims. So if you're not Muslim, you're not allowed to enter the area.
Mm-hmm.
So to kind of to start winding this down here, so since you found other ex-Muslims and you're part of the ex-Muslim community now, you have your face out there on YouTube and elsewhere on social media, and just talk a little bit about what you've experienced, since you have kind of been out there, as far as like the blowback you received from Muslims.
So overall, I don't really get that blowback, to be honest. I've certainly got messages of abuse and threats and everything, but comparatively, because my approach is a bit different. So when I create my videos in Urdu, I usually criticize the mentality more than the scripture itself, because then I just want. I don't care if you live in Pakistan. I don't care that you still believe in Quran. But if you look at the Quran from critical point of view, my job is done, because rationalism is something you can't get rid of. Once you start to look at things rationally, it just snowballs into. It just takes over your whole mentality.
It's like watching a magic trick, like being told how it works. You can't unsee it.
Yeah. So when in my videos or on Twitter, I actually criticize and ask for change in the mentality rather than talk about religion.
Yeah.
Because I think because
that's the only way that it can really happen, right? I don't think the scripture is going to change anytime soon.
Yeah. Yeah, and for example, I recently made a video in Urdu, the Pakistani and Indian language, where I go a video of a scholar, a really prominent scholar in Pakistan, who's talking about existence of God, and I actually, being completely respectful of the guy, he completely disagreed and asked people to look at it from a different point of view, just look at it from my point of view, essentially. And the response to that has been positive, actually. People, even though when people are disagreeing with me, they're just saying, we see where you're coming from. And that's all I want. I just want, when people no longer everybody knows that I'm an ex-Muslim. That's in the title of the video. And when people say, oh, I see where you're coming from, I think that's a step forward.
I think, I don't know if it's because I'm a woman, but even if I'm making good points, I don't get a very positive response.
Well, no, and I was going to say too, with what he just said a few moments ago, it kind of harkens back to what you guys were talking about earlier in the stream.
Yeah.
It's in that the female ex-Muslims seem to get a harsher criticism than male ex-Muslims, and you're saying you didn't really get a lot of don't get a lot of pushback, Ali, but I mean, Faye seems to be like a favorite target of some of these hateful Muslims.
Yeah, I'm not sure why. I don't know what it is about me. Maybe it's because I have crazy hair colors or something. I don't know. But I found that if I talk to people in person, they're less likely to lash out, because I think it's my presence as well is very, as an educator, I have to have like a very calm presence. But when in videos and in discussions online, I've had very few that are productive, especially the ones that are public. The DMs, sometimes they devolve into idiocy and name calling, and it's just like, you started by saying that you want to have a discussion, you don't want to watch any videos that I link you, and like the biggest one that I get is, why did you leave Islam? Which is why I even made the Allah is a cunt comment. Because that's why I left Islam. That's the simplest way of me saying why I left Islam. And that's
right.
the discussion I'll have.
And I think in that exchange too, sorry to cut you off, is the person was claiming to know why you left Islam and saying, well, you just left Islam because of this, that, and the other thing. And your response was, yeah.
Everybody knows why I left Islam but me, apparently.
Yeah.
But if they DM me and they're like, why did you leave Islam? I'll link them my video, which is like 10 minutes long, and say, this is why I left. I've made a video. And they'll be like, no, but I want a discussion with you. And I'm like, there's nothing more to discuss. This outlines perfectly why I left Islam. Like, it's not orchestrated, it's not scripted. Everything I do is off the top of my head. But for some reason, they still want to have like a discussion, and then the discourse just becomes like this textual psychoanalysis of being like, oh, so you're fucked in the head, that's why you left Islam. And it's like, why are you here? Why?
So send you posts, John, do you have data to support yourself? Send you, I'm on camera right now. That proves I exist. So I don't know. It's not CGI. That's the data I have to support myself.
But no, I think that, Ali, you have like a lot more productive conversations than I do on Twitter. But then, like, I think especially with me and Zara kind of goes off on one when she goes off on one, and so do I. But when we get harassed by figures like Ali Dawah, like Asadullah, he's just such a pathetic child. And I think I did link you, I think I did tag you in that conversation when we went to your house party. Because that was... But it was just a case of like, they don't, not only do they like harass us, but they don't make arguments. It's just a case of calling us failures and whores and bitches, and like that's what it goes. Whereas when you
hate God.
Yeah, I hate God, so suddenly I'm a whore. I mean, it wouldn't be incorrect. I just want like a factual reasoning behind it. But when Ali has a discourse online, and I see the discourse, like you've spoken to a few of the trolls that I've just muted because I can't be bothered with them, but you've had discourse with them and it looks productive, and I just don't know why. And it's probably because of like the gender difference, but it in my head, it doesn't make any sense.
So the willingness of to women, and so when a Muslim man gets into discussion with a woman, ex-Muslim or Muslim, they're already coming from a place where they say we are right because we're men.
Yeah, it's patriarchal.
The patriarchy, it changes it. And secondly, if you're a woman and you're outspoken and you're speaking against Islam, or you're speaking for Muslims to change their behavior around Islam, they're not gonna agree with you anyways, because they've already set their mind up that women are less intelligent than men. And
Yeah, and that's also something that they believe, that women are deficient in intelligence, and we're emotional, which is apparently is a bad thing.
And we see that happening. So I was Faye and I we went to this event hosted by this YouTuber husband and wife, Vidu Vids and Mimzi Vids. You guys should check them out. They're both ex-Muslims. So at that event, they were both asked the question about what kind of backlash they get. Vidu goes, "Oh, funnily, I don't really get much of backlash." And then Mimzi goes, "Oh, I get a lot of backlash and people just swearing at me." Sorry, excuse me.
And if you meet Mimzi, she's like the nicest person in the world. She's just a bucket of sunshine.
I remember you brought up Zara a few minutes ago. I remember on Twitter, she took a lot of heat from, and if I'm getting the religious beliefs right, I think it was from Hindus, because she had made a comment about an elephant-headed god that I believe Hindus believe in.
To be fair, that started with Harris and Armin. That wasn't her fight. I don't know why she got involved. That started with Harris, Sultan, and Armin, and they were getting like the same level of harassment as she was. But I don't know why she decided to insert herself into that conversation. I mean, I did as well, but not to the level that Zara did.
Yeah, I just found it kind of humorous because, I mean,
same shit.
Not to pick on Hindus, but that is kind of odd, having an elephant-headed god. I mean, so for someone to comment on that, I didn't think it was so egregious, but apparently a lot of Hindus did, because they gave those folks a lot of shit over at Zara and the other folks that Faye mentioned. So one thing I just realized, and I'll do it as an outro, but we started this podcast, and here I had this person make this lovely intro for this podcast for me, and I forgot to play it at the beginning of the show. So, so we will play that as an outro to the podcast. But I think we're going to start winding down here. I have some things to get to today myself, and just want to point out that, and I will put everybody's information in the video description here sometime today before the day is over, and put my contact information for on Twitter, because if you are an ex-Muslim, if you want to be a guest on this podcast, and as I said earlier, the next one won't be until after the first of the year, please reach out to me. I'll leave my Twitter information in the video description, and we'll make sure my DMs are open to anybody, whether you follow me or not. And just DM me if you have trouble getting a hold of me. DM Faye or Ali, and they can let me know. We want to. This is what we want to do. Okay, this podcast is going to be dedicated to this. We will come on. We will talk about different news items, different things that ex-Muslims are dealing with, and then there'll be a guest on here who will tell their story about their journey out of Islam. And well, Ali's, as he said a few moments ago, he didn't really get a lot of pushback. He talked about the struggle he had, 6 years of kind of transitioning out of belief. But just so you know, and there's a lot of people that are still in Muslim countries and that have experienced even worse situations than that. And those are the kind of, we want to have people on to tell those kind of stories, because if we can get this information out there, then we can give some hope to other people that are going through the struggle like Ali went through, like the transitioning from being a believer into a non-believer. Certainly when it comes to ex-Christian atheists, not to say that they don't have struggles too, because they do, but when it comes to the struggles of ex-Muslim atheists, it's just to such a larger magnitude than ex-Christian atheists go through. So let's let everybody tell about themselves. Ali, what are your final words here? And tell everybody about where they can find you as far as on YouTube and all that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it. So this is really important, the initiative you took, John, here. Thank you for that, because we do need ex-Muslims to be in the wider skeptic and atheist community, which we don't see happening for some reason, because ex-Muslims do get a lot of comfort from watching atheist content. And we do idealize to some extent some of wider communities, atheists and ex-Muslims, but we need to participate as well. We need to start raising awareness about the struggles that our community goes through. And I think being part of the wider atheist community and skeptic community, we can do that more effectively, and we can raise awareness on a wider level. And you can find me on Twitter. My Twitter handle's at Apostate Ali, which unfortunately I don't have the access to right now. I'm hoping in the next couple of days. My channel on YouTube is called Park Atheist, PAAKATHEISTS, with my co-host Sadia Hamid, you should follow her as well. And I create content in Urdu for the Pakistani audience, and I am planning to start creating more content in English as well, so we can actually reach the wider audience.
I'm going to be on there very soon, so...
Yes, you are. Can't back out.
So Ali's forcing me. It's the Zionist contract.
And my co-hostess with the mostest, Faye, what are your final words, and tell people where to find you?
Well, first and foremost, I just want to thank you, John, for doing this. Like, I think the first time you had me on, we had this discussion, and in my own complainy, ungrateful millennial way, I had said that atheists don't care about ex-Muslims as much as other issues, but I think the main reason for that is because, first and foremost, they're afraid to talk about Islam, and that fear is justified. And also because a lot of ex-Christian atheists don't really know much about Islam. So first and foremost, I want to thank you for giving us a platform in a wider skeptic community than just in an ex-Muslim bubble. I think it's really, really helpful for us to be integrated into the wider skeptic community. When I first came on the show, I told Ali about it. I told a lot of people about it, and I think it's a step in the right direction, because this content needs to become more mainstream, and I think it needs to be more accessible to everybody, Muslims who are doubting, Muslims who aren't doubting, ex-Muslims, atheists, agnostics. Everybody should have access to this content and know that Christianity isn't the only religion we can shit on. Islam has a lot of garbage that we need to take out and reform and talk about. So that's the first thing I want to say. Just thank you so much for having us on your platform and for giving us a voice. And in terms of like shilling my own thing, you can find me on YouTube. I'm Faye the Most Gracious. I have Instagram. I have Twitter. I have a new Twitter handle. I'm not going to say it here because I don't want Twitter to be my main platform for talking, because it just doesn't seem like the platform for me if I'm getting banned every single fucking month. It just doesn't seem like the right place. At the moment, I'm brainstorming other ways of reaching people. What seems to be the most popular is Reddit, but I don't think I'm popular enough to have a subreddit. But yeah, my content is mainly based in YouTube, and that's all I can really say.
All right. And thank you for your kind words, Faye. So again, this is the Apostate Alliance podcast. My channel is the Amateur Conversationalist, where we're having this right now. Please share this video, especially with any ex-Muslims that you know. Share this video with Muslims, for that fact. There may be Muslims that are on the fence and are questioning things, much like Ali described in his life. Again, the next episode of this will take place after the first of the year. We're going to get through the holidays here, and then we'll get on again. And hopefully, since a month will have passed when we have the second episode, I'm hoping I can rope Faye to come on and be the co-host again for episode number 2.
Yes, I would love to.
And definitely we're going to rope Ali into coming on as co-host when Faye isn't available. And as I said, I forgot to play the intro that this gentleman on YouTube made for me. He said he didn't want any credit for it, so I'm not going to mention his name. But Dragnot Silvis explained to me how to do this, so I'm going to attempt to play this. I'm going to put us backstage and then play this intro as an outro. Just a warning, though.